I'm joined by former New South Wales Labor Premier and former Foreign Minister Bob Carr. Thanks for joining us again, Bob. Fascinating leadership contest already. We've got a right leader and a left leader, but Anthony Albanese is talking about paring back on some of the taxation measures, and Chris Bowen is standing by them. They seem to have reversed positions.
Yeah, I think it'd be advisable for Labor just to tack back to, I guess, I'm groping for the best shorthand description, but the centrist position that we in state Labor governments during my time all around Australia, and Kevin Rudd pledging fiscal conservatism in 2007 were inclined to take. The challenge with the policy that very responsibly federal Labor settled on was that there were, in education, for example, $14 billion in increased outlays over 10 years, and therefore an obligation, very responsibly, and full marks to them for being responsible, to properly fund it. But the public very clearly looked at how it was going to be funded and said, well, we don't like that. And the other thing I'd say here, Chris, is based on state Labor experience, there was always something concrete to be said in my time on educational improvement. 2,500 extra teachers, reading recovery teachers in another election, a commitment to smaller class sizes in the early years of schooling. All these were very concrete things. But I don't think anyone going into a polling booth or a pre-poll station in this election could have told you, even if you had insisted on an answer, precisely what measurable classroom benefits we were going to see as a result of a big spending commitment on schools that was never really revisited during the election campaign.
I think that's it in a nutshell in many ways. They just talked about spending more money on schools. They wanted to spend more money on schools, but then the taxation measures were just really quite blatantly, well, we need to raise the money. Here's a place we can grab some money. I mean, that's not reform. That's just a tax grab, right?
Well, again, I'm a product of my experience, for better or for worse, during my time in 10 years heading a state government. When we went to the people in 1995, we'd made a big commitment that we'd recruit 2,500 extra teachers. Actually, I found those extra teachers, Chris, working in the State Department of Education. We got them out of bureaucratic jobs back into classrooms and were able to bring down class sizes, reduce the number of inappropriate composites. That was concrete, as was my commitment in 1999 when I went to the people and said there'll be reading recovery teachers to help any kids who've fallen behind. I'm just entertaining the notion that if federal Labor had gone to the people with 3 or 4 clear commitments, for example, having super maths teachers to drive our standard in maths up to that of Singapore and Shanghai.
Yeah, focusing on standards and outcomes rather than just dollars. I do want to move on to climate change. Bob Carr was central in the campaign. I mean, Joel Fitzgibbon, I think, has spoken very sensibly today. So Labor's got to be able to support climate action at the same time it supports mining and other industries. Is not the starting point for Labor here, the very sensible point here, to go back to where it was a couple of years ago and say that its climate targets should be the Paris targets, the global agreement that Australia has signed up to, rather than seeking to almost double those?
Well, let's look at where we are now in the climate debate, and that is, and this reflects a developing interest of mine that I'm going to clarify shortly. I think the way forward here is through business-driven initiatives. I think the technology is becoming available so fast. People will be making profits by bringing down our carbon emissions in a way even 2 years ago was impossible to foresee. And I think we've got an opportunity for getting a consensus by focusing on business-driven technology. I reckon this will appeal to both the government and the opposition. And in coal mining areas, it enables Labor, or the government for that matter, to say, well, listen, there is a global debate about the future of coal. We've got to have a transition plan. We've got to have a safety net. So in addition to saying that coal is part of the energy mix in this country, we're going to have in place in coal mining communities a commitment to future technologies, to wind and solar, and even to hydrogen and technologies that are just beginning to emerge.
The Greens have
And I
been
think
promoting a plan, something like that. But Bob Carr, don't you think the starting point for this, for Labor to get back onto mainstream values when it comes to climate, is to agree on the current Paris targets, at least and until technological change, as you say, makes going further easier?
Well, again, we're arguing from the same song sheet. I think reaching those targets, going beyond those targets, arises from a conversation, is going to be driven by a conversation we now have with the business sector. I spoke to someone in a large American-owned corporation a month or so ago. He said that there are things becoming available now that only 2 years ago he wouldn't have dreamt of. And we've got to shift the conversation of not approving or closing down to saying, on top of the coal sector that you currently host as a region in Australia, we're going to ensure that you've got a big stake in the new and different technologies that business is making available.
Great stuff, Bob Carr. Thanks for joining us.
Pleasure, Chris. Thank you.